What's going on, you curious cats? A little bit of a dramatic landscape here this morning with the clouds in the background and the sun shining. It's been clouded over all morning, so I thought I'd take this little window of sunshine to make a quick video and just keep pumping them out, my morning videos, just see if I can stick in a routine here. So I thought I'd speak a little bit this morning on what a fiat currency is. I don't know if you guys have heard the term yet. I'm kind of targeting these videos to people that are a little newer to finance. So I find that there's kind of this gap between a lot of the people that I follow are pretty kind of advanced economists, and a lot of the stuff that they speak about is a little too advanced for your kind of entry level people. So I'm trying to bridge that gap and make videos that are that resonate and kind of are a nice entry level for people that are just starting to develop an interest in finance. So with that being said, I'm going to speak a little bit on fiat currency. What fiat means is it means it's unbacked. So before, all the government currencies used to be backed by gold. The way they actually got the people to adopt these government currencies were initially we all used gold and silver, and then the banking cartel came in and they said, you know, deposit your gold and your silver with us, we'll take care of it. And you know, the people were pretty skeptical that the bank would do that. So what they did is they started issuing paper currency, but they made it fully redeemable in gold. So they said, you know, we'll give you this paper promissory note that says this paper note represents so much gold or whatever. So you'd use the paper currency, which, you know, people are like, why would I use paper? It doesn't even have any inherent value. So, you know, how am I supposed to take paper, this paper money for, you know, maybe some hard assets that I have, or some food that I grew, or some labor that I contributed? Why would you trade your time, your labor, your assets for just paper money? People wouldn't in the past. They would only do it for gold and silver or other goods and services. So the bank kind of came out and they convinced people to take paper money and use paper money, because they said, you know, don't worry, at any point you can come in and you can get your gold and silver back, and you can redeem these paper promissory notes in gold or silver. So people said, okay, that seems reasonable. You know, you'll hold all our gold and silver in the bank, and at any point, if we want, we can come get our gold and silver. And so people started doing that. And then World War I happened. And what happened is the governments, it was kind of the first time they printed more money than there was gold and silver backing it. So they extended the money supply without acquiring more gold or silver. And that basically was the first time they started devaluing the currencies. And people didn't really realize it right away. They actually used the money to fund World War One, because they didn't have enough money through taxation and whatever to fund all the big wars. So they created more money than there was out of thin air, and they used that money to basically go to war. And what happened is afterwards, the currency devalued by something like 45%. And then they did it again for World War II. So when you start to realize how this all played out, you realize that the first time that we kind of went off of completely backing our gold and having our money and having a solid currency, it was used to fund war. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of war. I think we should strive for peace and union amongst the nations. To some extent, we should be able to trade freely and all that. But when we're using the currency to fund war, it's not a good thing. And what that did is it devalued the currency, and it created a lot more poverty, and it stole the wealth from the people, and it used that wealth to fund war. So basically, after that, in 1971, like what they did is they slowly had less and less gold representing the currency. So initially it was backed one for one, and then they were just backing it with a portion of gold. So they'd say, oh yeah, for every $1 million we have this many ounces of gold, and it was fractional reserve. And then basically in 1971 they completely went off the gold standard, and they no longer had any gold. They no longer had any requirements to back the currency with gold. Sorry, just having my morning coffee here still. So you might ask why that has any relevance and why that's important to back a currency with gold. And you know why it is? It's because, so let's look at individual countries as kind of entities, and they want to trade amongst each other. So let's look at the US. They want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has a limited resource, a limited natural resource of oil, and there's only so much, and they have to spend their time and their energy and their labors to go and take this resource from the earth, to go and harvest it, to get it and bring it to market. And in the past, what would be a fair trade is the US would trade them for something that they had to put time and money and energy into getting. So they would maybe, let's say they would trade for automobiles, because that's something the US has been really good at in the past. So they would trade for another good or service or labor or asset, right? And what happened is, when we went off the gold standard, the US was actually able to just come in and print this money out of thin air. There was nothing limiting them from creating more currency. So they basically come in and create currency out of thin air without actually putting in something of value, without creating something, without growing some food or having another product that they would trade for this oil with Saudi Arabia. They would just come in and print the money out of thin air. And then they would go, oh, here, we're just going to give you some paper for that oil. So the paper has no intrinsic value, and they're trading it for oil, which has so much intrinsic value. And it's not fair at all. It's not a fair trade. It would be a fair trade if the US traded something of value, like automobiles, or let's say some kind of food they were producing. Then it's a fair trade. It's one for one. But they convinced us all to go off of the gold-backed system, and now these paper currencies aren't backed by anything, and they have no intrinsic value, but they've convinced everyone to take this phony paper for hard assets. So they come in and they buy all the stuff of true value, like oil, homes, businesses, food production, factories, all of that, and they give you paper money for that in exchange. So they're giving you something that has no value for something with extreme value. And that created this unfairness. You can't trade amongst nations when basically this other country can just come in and counterfeit money and then give it to you in exchange for your hard goods. Like, where's the trust in that system? You need the trust that says, we're taking something of value for something we're giving you. That's a fair trade. And so you need trust in this system. The money, the currency, is at the root of our entire system. So when we don't have trust in our system, in the basis of all of it, how are we supposed to trade freely amongst nations and have trust that what they're giving us for our assets actually has value, and there's actually some value attached to it? And when it's completely unbacked, there's no guarantee. They just basically print it out of thin air. It's a more just system if we can prove that they actually put in resources, time, effort, labor, innovation to create that currency. Then we know it's a fair trade. But when there's nothing backing these currencies, like I said, then there's just no guarantee that they actually put anything of value or created anything or put any time into creating that currency that they're trading for our hard assets. So that's why we need what's called hard money to actually have a solid currency at the basis of this capitalist system. And we actually don't have capitalism. That's a misunderstanding. The elites want you to believe that this is capitalism and that capitalism is the problem, but it's not. This is, I've discussed this in other videos. It's closer to some kind of socialism where they bail out industries and they get to decide which industries they promote, and they get to bail out whatever they want, and print free money and give it away, and subsidize whatever industry they want. So it's closer to socialism. Capitalism is a very beautiful system, and I'll make a video on the future on why that is, why capitalism is actually the best system we've ever had, and why it's a very just and fair system. And don't get it mixed up with what we have right now, because what we have right now is creating a lot of inequality, and that's because it isn't true free market capitalism. True free market capitalism actually ensures that the wealth distribution is equally distributed to a large extent. So there's actually an interesting thing that happened in the Great Depression of 1930. We went through a large deflationary period, and a lot of people think that's a bad thing. Deflation, everything loses value. But the interesting thing about it was, after that deflationary period, there was the most amount of wealth distribution we ever had. And that means that the most amount of people live the best quality of life than ever before. So that's, to me, that is something we should strive for. I think the more we can have the wealth evenly distributed, the better. And one of the ways to do that is to restore true free market capitalism and to have a solid hard money at the basis of that, so that trade becomes equal. It becomes fair amongst people. That we don't have one nation that can just come in and create money out of thin air and then come buy hard assets for it. A fair system is where there's an equal, fair trade that takes place, where one country or one entity has something of value and they trade it for something else of value. So that the way to ensure that is to reinstate a hard money that helps ensure that when somebody has money, that they actually produce something of value to obtain that money, so that when we give something of our own of value for that money, we can ensure that they actually contributed for it, and that they didn't just come printed out of thin air and are able to come and trade our most valuable